residential zone in this area as something the community does not support. So here we have the local government that's relevant. And I ask you to just, again, hypothetically, put yourselves in your own electorate. Pick the biggest local government that is in your electorate, responsible for the most significant urban area in your electorate. And imagine that there's a proposal here in your electorate that is significant and place-shaping and permanent for two of the biggest suburbs you've got there, and the local government in your area says to you, please don't do this via Parliament, which should be done the proper way through local government. That's what your local government elected representatives had sent to you as a piece of correspondence. And you turn around and do what? Do you ignore it? Do you so know Parliament is the right way to do it? How are you going to justify that to your local government in your electorate? I don't think you can. And if you couldn't do it in your electorate and wouldn't think it's appropriate in your electorate, why would you think it's appropriate in mine? The Hobart City Council engagement on the Mount Nelson and Sandy Bay Neighbourhood Plan is detailed in that engagement report I mentioned, Madam Deputy President, and it was provided to us by the City of Hobart along with this correspondence. And it's really clear on residents' views on development in their suburbs. And just to paraphrase, I can point people to page 7 of that report. It says a range of things, but I'm going to paraphrase a couple of them. From Mount Nelson, for example, there's support for restricting future development due to constraints such as limited road access and bushfire risk. For Sandy Bay, there are concerns expressed about new development and adding to existing problems around traffic congestion and the rationale behind population forecasts. That's not supportive of any new development, some support for new architecturally designed mixed-use and medium-density housing. That's not what's being proposed potentially under this rezoning effort that we're being asked to do today. What we're being asked to do does not comply with what the local community wants, and they have not been allowed to have any meaningful, proper process of community consultation into this planning decision that we're making today. None. None. Any of us supporting this here today are spitting in the face of the communities in these suburbs and telling them that they do not deserve to have a say in this place-shaping decision of their local area. Are you okay with that? Every member in this place? Would you be okay with it in your electorate? Deputy President, something that's been touched on by others and I will touch on briefly is around the question that hangs over, does UTAS have a coherent business case for what happens next if this rezoning occurs? The NTEU certainly had a view on that and they shared it with us in their correspondence. They said this: the bill's central financial rationale is that land sales above Churchill Avenue will raise approximately $100 million, which will then be directed towards a $500 million STEM precinct redevelopment. The NTEU Tasmania regards this proposition as financially incoherent. The $100 million figure has not been independently verified, is not supported by a current market valuation that has been made public, and there is, as matters presently stand, no identified buyer for the land. More significantly, the $500 million STEM redevelopment is dependent not only on the $100 million that may or may not be realised from a land sale, but on a further $400 million from the Commonwealth Government. No commitment to that funding has been secured. The Commonwealth has not made any public undertaking to provide $400 million, whether on an 80-20 basis as originally hoped or on the 50-50 terms that more recent federal policy suggests. The Infrastructure Australia submission made by the state government does not constitute a federal funding commitment. It constitutes an expression of interest in a queue. Similarly, the state government has not committed its own funds as a capital contribution to the STEM project. In the absence of both federal and state funding commitments, the STEM precinct cannot proceed, regardless of whether the land is sold. The university would be left with, at best, $100 million against a $500 million project, a shortfall that makes the plan undeliverable. Furthermore, the university has acknowledged that its $500 million STEM plan does not include the cost of replacing all the facilities that would be lost through the rezoning and sale of the land above Churchill Avenue. Estimates put the replacement cost of those facilities at approximately $300 million. No funding has been identified for this. The Legislative Council is being asked to approve a land sale that would destroy existing infrastructure without any credible plan or means to replace it. End of quote. Madam Deputy President, the rezoning and sale provisions are predicated on the UTAS STEM business case, and there are absolutely huge questions over the viability of the STEM business case. As NTEU so succinctly say, it is unfunded. They missed the opportunity for Commonwealth funding at the 2025 federal election. The assumption of $100 million in state government funding is unsound, as the state government has confirmed that it has made no such commitment. The $100 million land value above Churchill Ave is not a market valuation. The central cost figure that UTAS puts forward for its STEM project of $501.5 million is not supported by clear evidence. On all counts, it's likely to be significantly undercosted. It does not appear that UTAS has costed the movement and replacement of all the STEM facilities that might be required as part of that process. In November 2024, the Vice-Chancellor of the university said that work would need to start within 12 to 18 months for this to happen and for this to be viable. We've basically missed that window. So here we are now with an unfunded, questionable proposition in terms of costs laid out and the timelines blown. This doesn't look good in terms of being a comprehensive, credible business case, Madam Deputy President. And by the way, the $100 million from the state government is an absolute smokescreen. There's no real understanding about how that $100 million gets realised here, Madam Deputy President. For a start, the valuation was based on residential land sold in the area surrounding here. So I think it was a 3 or a 5 kilometre radius. They've looked at residential land sales across a period of time. They've averaged it out. Now, this is not residential land ready for sale. This is an entirely different proposition to that. So it's bizarre to me to hear an assertion that somehow the $100 million valuation is a market valuation. I don't think anybody could claim that to be credibly true. And the government isn't going to be handing over $100 million to take possession of the land. It's not clear that there's any developer who would be interested to hand over $100 million for the value of the land. When I've had briefings of this in the past from the university and I've asked them, how will you realise this money from this land if we rezone? There's been no coherent answer provided. I've even been told, well, we're talking to the government about maybe partnering to do development on the land. That seems astonishing to me. I asked, who are you talking to? Is it DPAC? Is it Homes Tasmania? Is it Department of State Growth? Not really sure. They're sort of talking to DPAC mostly. No clear plan about it. And if the state government and UTAS were thinking about developing this land themselves, then that puts a whole other question out there. Who's funding all the work that would need to be done to get it ready for development and then presumably eventual sale or use to realise the $100 million? Because we've got to find somewhere, where does the $100 million come from that can then be put towards the STEM facilities below Churchill Avenue? I'm not surprised that the university has stated that it's prepared to have signed some sort of deed poll to say, we promise that the money we get for the land will be spent on the STEM precinct, because it's completely unclear that they'll have any avenue to actually get money for this land, even if we rezone it here today. Unbelievable. State government appears to have supported the UTAS business case, submitting it through to Infrastructure Australia. It's certainly not clear that the state government did any analysis to assess its validity or its merits, or to even properly acquaint itself with it. And there's certainly no indication that Infrastructure Australia will support this project as a priority. So with no Commonwealth funding in sight, no state government funding promised for the land above Churchill Ave, no realistic market valuation for that land, no definite development proposal for the land above Churchill Ave, which would recoup for UTAS the funding required to move all the STEM to below Churchill Ave, or even to make a decent start on it, it's clear there needs to be a reconsideration of what's realistic and strategic options that we have here. Pressing ahead on this path, which may have seemed the easy and quick way forward in 2024, is clearly not that now. By trying to subvert proper process, UTAS and the government have wasted 2 years, and in the meantime, we still have current facilities being continued to be allowed to be degraded, and we have still no clear options going forward for how we realise this STEM vision for the Sandy Bay campus. I'm going to talk a little bit now, Madam Deputy President, about the loss of vital infrastructure and future capacity that would be imposed on us if we pass this bill and allow for what's planned to occur. From the NTEU, the land above Churchill Avenue, this is a quote from their correspondence to us. The land above Churchill Avenue is not vacant. It contains the Life Sciences Building, 16 plant science research glasshouses, the Bushfire Research Centre, the Seismic Research Station maintained in partnership with the University of California, San Diego, and a significant amount of student accommodation. These are not redundant facilities. They are active, functioning assets that support the university's research output and its capacity to house students. Losing them without replacement does direct and immediate harm to the university's academic and research mission. The NTEU Tasmania draws the Legislative Council's attention to the longer-term significance of this land. The Sandy Bay campus represents the university's principal footprint in the state's capital. That land, once sold and rezoned, is permanently lost to the institution. The suggestion that the university can later expand or develop additional student accommodation facilities on the remaining land below Churchill Ave has not been adequately assessed. There is insufficient space below Churchill Avenue to replace what would be lost above it. Approving this bill forecloses future options for the university at a time when its student accommodation capacity is already under pressure and when retaining students in Tasmania should be a strategic priority for the institution and the state. Madam Deputy President, I can completely concur with the NTEU on this. What's typically presented to us by the government and the university when we're talking about this proposition is, look, it's all just a bunch of rubbish old buildings up there anyway, not fit for purpose. People are rattling around in them, better to get rid of them and we can do something better, squashed in below Churchill Ave. It's just not true. Some of those buildings have been recently refurbished and upgraded. Money has been invested and spent on new facilities up there, including our fire research hub, including the seismic vault, which is actually an incredibly unique facility up there. It's not clear how that's going to be dealt with and what impact will have. We haven't been provided with any information clearly about that. That seismic vault was a site specifically selected 70 years ago, nearly 70 years ago, for the first station in the southern hemisphere where there would be these measurements made in terms of seismic activity. We've been collecting data consistently at that site, the only one in Australia to consistently collect data at that across the time period of 1957 to 2026. We're part of a worldwide network. We're a reliable part of that network. We've also, just in 2024, had the University of California, San Diego, upgrade and pay for the refurbishment of the facility in 2024. What's going to happen to that facility? Is it going to be affected by this? What will we do in terms of that valuable partnership we've had for 70 years, providing that information and data? I don't know. We haven't, again, it's part of the gap, the void here of information we don't have. The thing that I find really quite galling and disrespectful is statements that appear in the government's second reading speech, for example, but are also spouted by all sorts of people promoting this this rezoning in this bill and the proposition of getting rid of the land above Churchill Ave. And that's that this is surplus land. and nobody's using it, it's not going to be needed. Well, rubbish. We have never been provided with any assessment of future need that shows this won't be needed. Never. Once it's gone, it's gone. It's presumptuous right now, particularly if you're not even prepared to put a piece of analysis in front of us and forward planning in front of us that says we definitely know for sure the university won't need this at any time in the future. Because as soon as we give it away, as soon as it's gone to be developed for other purposes, we never get it back. This is gifted land. This was gifted from the Tasmanian people for education purposes. It's a unique location for a university campus. It's absolutely beautiful location broadly across that Sandy Bay campus. A lot of the land above Churchill Ave is bushland. It's really valuable and beautiful in terms of environment to be in, to do all the different sorts of work that's being done there. We can't just pretend it's surplus, it's rubbish, there's crappy old buildings on it, we might as well get rid of it, we'll never need it. No one has presented us with any analysis that tells us that is true. But we're prepared to permanently ditch it, to permanently constrain our university into the future, to probably close doors for options. There are new things that have been developed there just in recent years. There would be, absolutely inevitably, ways that that land would be useful and important and attract partnerships and attract opportunities into the future for the university if it was to be retained for the university as intended when it was gifted by the Tasmanian people. How offensive to have the presumption to say we'll never need it when you haven't even bothered to present us with analysis that backs that up. And by the way, what's quite obvious is that we've got facilities there which have been characterised as old and run down and not good enough to attract people, and yet those facilities under, say, the plant science area, see UTAS ranked as 35th in the world when we talk about academic ratings. The thing that draws students and staff and research partners to a university, the things are rankings, what we deliver in terms of quality output. Clearly, in the area of plant science, just to name one, UTAS is delivering incredibly. We are 35th in the world for that discipline in our ranking. Astonishing to pretend that the places in which that work is done are somehow so unfit for purpose, we need to ditch them in order to attract people into them. We can clearly, with our rankings, do that very effectively. And I think that's the same actually when we talk about students. We've heard clearly from numerous people, and I don't care what AI says because, quite frankly, AI would have gone onto the internet and scraped off all the promo material from every university there is who's just built a brand spanking shiny new building. That's where AI would have got its information about what students like and about how important it is to have all these brand spanking shining new facilities. Sure, it's nice to have those, but actually we've seen no evidence to tell us that students are being turned away by the facilities on offer here. We've seen no evidence put to us about that. Claims made that what we need to attract students, no evidence to back those claims up. Not one. The one thing we do know is that rankings attract students, and actually rankings in our STEM areas not too bad. I do notice that the Minister in her second reading speech did not take the trouble to celebrate our successes in STEM. She took the trouble to point to apparent gaps in the digital space, and I don't dispute that. I'm sure we can better develop our capacity in the digital area and absolutely do that. We'd have all sorts of options for doing that. It is not contingent on this bill for us to contemplate how we might best do that. By all means, let's charge ahead in terms of digital capacity under our STEM areas. But what a disgrace, actually, to have a minister not even take the time to acknowledge in a second reading speech that we have some exceptional outcomes in STEM areas already under current facilities. I'm going to talk a little bit about the area of the housing outcomes we apparently may expect from this effort, Madam Deputy President. Now, I am a strong proponent of pulling all the levers we have to address our housing crisis in this state, and I don't think there's anybody who could pretend that I wasn't. I'm well aware of the need to address our housing crisis. I'm particularly aware of the need for us to increase our social and affordable housing, our public housing in this state. I'm particularly aware of the need to address the deficiencies of our private rental market in this state, all of which I speak about regularly here. There is absolutely nothing about this bill and the information we have to accompany it, which is virtually zilch, that guarantees to us any particular housing outcome from the rezoning of this land. Nothing. There's particularly nothing that guarantees anything about social, affordable or public housing outcomes from the rezoning of this land. Nothing. No guarantee. We've heard this also from the NTEU. And I'm going to put on the record what they've put to us in their correspondence on this aspect of the bill. They say this: proponents of this bill have repeatedly invoked the housing crisis as justification for rezoning the land above Churchill Avenue to inner residential. This framing is not supported by evidence and misrepresents the character and limitations of the site. Much of the land targeted by the rezoning comprises steep rocky terrain and is occupied by existing university buildings, including student accommodation, teaching facilities, research infrastructure and specialist scientific installations. The premise that this land is ready or even suitable for residential development has not been tested through any proper planning or geotechnical assessment. No developer has come forward with an offer to purchase and develop the land. No business case establishing that the site can sustain the kind of residential density that inner residential zoning anticipates has been produced or tabled in the Parliament. The claim that this legislation will produce affordable or social housing is at best speculative and at worst deliberately misleading. The NTEU Tasmania is not aware of any commitment from the university, any developer, the state government or any other party that a single affordable or social dwelling will be delivered on this land as a result of this bill. The community deserves more than rhetoric on this question. The Legislative Council should not lend its authority to housing promises that have no foundation in evidence, no identified buyer and no planning framework to deliver them. I agree, Mr President, with the NTEU on that front. There's no guarantee out of this of any eventuality of any particular housing outcome on this site. We also don't know what will be the sequence of events here. We rezone the land. It then has to go through a whole bunch of other processes, no doubt, with development applications maybe that eventuate. And that's after the uncertainty of whether are we selling the land, is the university partnering with the state to develop the land, is it going to be done holus bolus, what's the time frame for it to be done. We've got STEM facilities that need to remain in use until there's somewhere else to put them if we're developing new ones down below Churchill Ave. But we need the money from selling and then having the developer develop that land before we can afford to build the ones below Churchill Avenue. So that's going to be a very complex sequence of events about how any of that works in practice. And in the meantime, those facilities above Churchill Avenue would sit there continuing to be let to be deteriorating without maintenance, presumably, because why would you invest in facilities that ultimately you're intending to replicate, even if the ability to replicate them and shift people to below Churchill Ave is really realistically nowhere in sight? This is a really fraught proposition, Mr President. Really fraught proposition. There's nothing clear about the sequence of events that's expected after this rezoning if it goes through this place. They haven't bothered to present us with a clear outline of what that would be in a way that's credible and evidenced. I've heard all sorts of speculation but I've never had anything put before me that clearly explains what the expectation is. Again, when you sneakily go to the Premier behind closed doors and get a special deal for yourself to bring it through this place as legislation without any of the requirements of a planning system, that's what happens. We end up with no explanation and certainly nothing on the record. Mr President, I want to touch on some matters from the Minister's second reading speech that I just felt needed to be commented on. The Minister talked about the fact that Tasmania has only one university and its future matters deeply, not only for higher education but for our economy, our workforce and our capacity to grow and prosper as a state. Absolutely, Mr President. I absolutely agree with that statement. That's true. There are so many people here passionately hoping for our university to thrive and to do well. And that's why it's quite tragic, quite frankly, that the government hasn't stepped up in any meaningful way through all sorts of crises and drama that this university has been experienced for a long time now. And I know the member for Hobart spoke about this in her contribution quite well. This is a university that has lurched from one problematic situation to another for many years now, when it comes to governance, when it comes to community trust, when it comes to questions over management culture and leadership within the university. Mr President, there's been all sorts of disturbing things that have occurred. Vast numbers of academics exiting the institution, most of them not able to talk about it once they do. Vast numbers of disquieted students and staff who don't feel they can necessarily safely speak up about it. Certainly through the inquiry process we heard from them. On the record, we had to hear from retired academics and staff because they were safe to speak to us in that inquiry, but we heard from others who couldn't openly speak about things because they were fearful of repercussions. There have been questions about the accountability and transparency and governance standards of the university, and I have seen this state government not once step up with concern to try to address any of those things, to try to ask itself what might be we need to do to ensure that this precious public institution, our one university for our state, isn't jeopardised in this current moment through poor governance, through management missteps, or through losing the confidence of the Tasmanian people. If you want to talk about why students might be going interstate instead of staying here, I suggest you look at the sorts of things that we've been hearing through staff surveys, from student representative groups, through concerns being raised about governance over this last at least 7-8 years under this university's leadership. Mr President, if a state government wants to speak about the importance of this university and how we have to ensure its future, they have done nothing about all those very vocally expressed, very clearly in the public domain, identifiable issues that have been going on. There should have been alarm bells ringing when the university wanted to holus bolus move its campus into the CBD, and the Hobart community en masse stood up, 74% of the voters who did the elector poll, and said, no, we don't want you to do that. And that was because they hadn't been asked properly. The proposal hadn't been robustly tested and put to them. There was no social licence for it. That should have been absolute alarm bells for a state government in terms of the behaviour of this precious public institution. Mr President, some of the other things from the second reading speech I just want to mention briefly. And here we are, one part where this was said, but at Sandy Bay, many STEMS buildings are among the oldest on the campus. They are no longer fit for purpose and enrolments have declined as a result, despite the growing national demand. Where's the evidence, Mr President? At no stage in this whole process has anyone presented us with evidence about that. Now, gosh, it will be interesting if if the minister on summing up stands up here and somehow has something to refute me saying that, because my goodness, would that tell us that there was information and evidence sitting behind this that wasn't presented to us prior to making the decision in this place? But so far, we have certainly not seen anything to back up a statement like that. I think second reading speeches are pretty important in this place. They can certainly get referred to later in courts and the like. It's pretty important to make sure that there's accurate statements made. So if I was the minister and I was told to stand up and say that they are no longer fit for purpose and enrolments have declined as a result, I'd want to know that there's evidence about that to back up the statement. I wonder if the minister did. I don't know. We haven't seen the evidence. Maybe she has. If she has, she hasn't shared it with us. That's an indictment in itself. Mr. President, there's no pathway created by this legislation. The second reading speech suggested there was, that it creates a pathway for value generated from the land to be reinvested in a world-class STEM precinct. My goodness, we all want a world-class STEM precinct, Mr. President, for UTAS. That would be great. Of course, that's something we want to see come to reality. This is not a pathway for it, though, because there's no clear way that the decision made here today, if it goes ahead, lays out clear steps to get us there. It doesn't. There's no funding available. There's no clear plan for it. The sequence of events hasn't been mapped out. I've spoken about rankings. There were things in the second reading speech that seemed to suggest that new facilities are needed to attract top researchers and educators. I think that's, at best, partially true. At best, partially true. No doubt, new facilities are attractive, I'm sure. But are they what attracts people? Fundamentally, top researchers and educators, partners in research projects, for example, other institutions. Another institution who wants to partner with us isn't going to care about a shiny building. They're going to care about, are we ranked similarly to them or above them, because that would build their credibility. Rankings are what fundamentally counts. The thing that I found quite offensive as the member for this area in the upper house is the statements in the second reading speech that said the future of the Sandy Bay campus has been the subject of extensive community discussion and engagement. It sure has, Mr. President. And you know what the community has resoundingly said every single step of the way? Every time UTAS has put forward something they want to do with this campus, the community has said either no or not quite like that, it should be done differently. And also, we should be consulted with differently, generally, because they weren't consulted with respectfully in the first place. It has not been the subject of extensive community discussion and engagement. It's been, certainly the discussion part's right, I've discussed it a lot. There's a lot of discussion in the community, but they don't feel engaged with. It says in the second reading speech, this bill was the result of that engagement and discussion, apparently. And it also talks about the fact that the rezoned area, the proposed rezoned areas, the parcels of land above Churchill Ave, were included in the university's master plan, which was apparently informed by a substantial program of engagement in 2021. Well, I can tell you what, in 2021, that master plan was resoundingly rejected at every stage through any form of consultation that was had, but certainly then through the elector poll in 2022. Again, the people have spoken on this quite resoundingly, but it's not in the university's favour. It's not in favour of what's proposed here. And I can't let it go through this place without making that absolutely crystal clear and emphasising it. These are Tasmanians who are directly affected. This is the community of Hobart. These are people who we legislate to have a say in our planning system. Under the normal processes, it's required that we listen to the voice of the community and take it into consideration. It doesn't always eventuate that things go the way the loudest voices say, no, but we have a process that allows for it. This process didn't have that in a meaningful way in this planning decision we're making here today. I've talked about the Hobart City Council process around their neighbourhood plan and the fact that, yes, they put a discussion paper out, but then they heard things from the community, and the engagement paper makes that really clear. The community are highly concerned about what's this sort of proposal of high density. They like the idea potentially of medium density. They like the idea of well thought out development, perhaps, but they're really concerned about the impacts of high density development, particularly on the amenity, the traffic, etc. in the area. I find it really interesting that the second reading speech says the university has continued to receive technical and planning advice from the Hobart City Council officers on this land. Now that's astonishing, because when we asked to see that, we weren't given it. It wasn't made available to us. It's really murky, really murky. There's a space, a void of transparency that exists between the government, the university and potentially the Hobart City Council in terms of their planning staff and any involvement they've had in discussions. That space there is not visible to us. It hasn't been made accessible to us. We haven't had the benefit of any expert advice coming out of it. And the fact that it actually hasn't even been properly documented and laid out for us what it looks like, these interactions, is really suspicious. It does not point to good governance. It doesn't point to probity. It points to questions over integrity. Mr. President, with so much uncertainty and lack of information or detail available to us, clearly there's been plenty of machinations behind the scenes to cook up this deal, resulting in this rezoning amendment to the bill. But neither the Rockcliffe government nor UTAS governance and senior management and leadership provide confidence that we should take anything on trust or have uncritical faith in their probity and their commitment to good governance. Nothing. All they've done is actually give us reasons to question it. There's been obstructive approaches to RTI from both the government and from UTAS. There's been a lack of transparency. There's the decision, the purposeful decision to make these interactions and decisions behind closed doors instead of in an open and accountable way. UTAS governance broadly is not accountable. The University Council is virtually answerable to no one. It's also a very internally focused group at risk of groupthink, and that's something that came out of the UTAS inquiry here. It's something that's come out of the Senate inquiry nationally and the other reviews that have been done on university governance matters broadly. It's certainly demonstrated here. All of these things do not invite us to have confidence when we see this murky behaviour behind closed doors here between the government and the university. It's not acceptable to expect us here, as responsible parliamentary decision makers for this state, to basically have to take on faith that the government has satisfied itself that all planning assessments are fine, and they've talked to the Hobart City Council staff all about it. It's all good, no worries, mate. It's not realistic to expect us, at permanent cost to the valuable publicly gifted asset of the Sandy Bay campus, to give free rein to UTAS Council and senior management for a project or series of projects that are based on non-existent funding opportunities, no comprehensive business case, a history of projects stalling, changing, having costs overrun, and a future plan based on a mud map. Mr. President, it's entirely unacceptable. Before concluding, there's one thing I really want to do as part of my contribution, and that's to express my absolute deep appreciation for every single community member who's contacted me about this issue, to express their high concern, their distress, their anger, their frustration, their puzzlement, and their sadness about what this bill proposes to do. And they're absolutely befuddled as to how on earth this could be seen as being appropriate or possible. How on earth could our Parliament act like this and pass this sort of travesty of a bill? Mr. President, I can tell you I've been contacted by hundreds of people, if not thousands, on this over the years, the different iterations and stages of concern about decision-making on this matter. I've been contacted by community members, by current students, by parents of current students and future students, by retired academics, by current academics, sometimes freely writing to me, perhaps sometimes also as union reps, so they've got that protection behind them. But I've also had current academics and staff members contacting me very quietly, very concerned. They don't want any repercussions because they've spoken to me to express their views. I've had family members of current staff who've contacted me to express concerns about this, but also made it clear they don't want that to become known because they're worried about their family member having repercussions from a family member speaking to me about it. It's really quite sad, actually. I've had locals in Mount Nelson and in Sandy Bay talk to me about this at length. I've had even members of, for example, the bush care groups that are responsible for those local areas getting in touch with me to tell me about their concerns about it. I've had business owners, local and otherwise, talking to me about this. I've even had farmers from other parts of the state getting in touch to tell me their views about this, all raising concerns, all expressing their hope that we do not pass this bill. And I know we've had people on the other side asking us to pass it. My assessment of most of those is they want to see the outcome in relation to STEM, an improvement in STEM facilities, and that's something we all want. But they have swallowed the misapprehension that this bill is the only pathway to that and that it's an appropriate and acceptable pathway to that. I agree with their stated outcomes that they want. I agree that we want one day to be able to update STEM and for us to have excellent facilities in that area in ways that perhaps we don't have now. But it's a shame that they've been made to believe this bill is the only way to do it and therefore they have to support this bill and ask us to support it. I still appreciate them getting in touch though and sharing their views about it. I share their aspirations for the university very much. Mr. President, where to from here? From the NTEU, I'll just quote finally a final piece from them. They said this in their correspondence to us. The right course of action is to restore the bill to its original protective form, requiring parliamentary approval before any disposal of Sandy Bay land can occur, and to allow planning and financial preconditions for any future transaction to be properly established before this Parliament is asked to approve one. That approach respects the community, protects the university's assets and preserves the integrity of the planning system. Mr. President, I agree with the NTEU on that. That is the right course of action. To retain the original intention of the bill, the protection of land for the Sandy Bay campus, to reject the inappropriate rezoning and to remove it from the bill. I have amendments drawn up to assist us to do that, which I may or may not have the opportunity to do. This would involve deleting Section 7 and Schedule 2, voting against those clauses, and then adjusting Schedule 1 to make sure the whole campus area is included as protected land. This would leave then Hobart City Council to be able to resume its strategic planning process for the neighbourhood plan, and then any effort to rezone those areas be pursued under a normal process, an accountable process, a legislative process, one that we can all have confidence and faith in. Mr. President, this bill is an inappropriate imposition on this chamber to be a planning authority without any expert advice and accountable evidence to inform our decision. We all want UTAS to thrive, to be successful, to be a jewel in the crown for our state. It's highly important because they're our one and only university. However, that position is one that we cannot achieve just through this bill. We have to think about how we can achieve that, but also not dispense with good process and proper governance. We need to be able to say, no, the university doesn't get a free pass on appropriate governance. It doesn't get a free pass on integrity, doesn't get a free pass on probity. It should have to go through our legislative processes like everybody else. And I do want to reiterate my earlier point, Mr. President. In closing, to every single member here, and I mean this sincerely, I would like every single member here to hear this sincerely. If this was in your electorate, being done in this way to your community, could you support it? I can pretty much guarantee that if any member was in my shoes with this situation, they absolutely could not and would not support this bill. So on that, Mr President, I cannot support the bill.
Question is the bill be read the second time.